Hello, true duelists. Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Single Card History, the series where I talk about some of the cards that have impacted Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout the years, and some of the other ones that didn't. Today's card, the ace monster of Yu-Gi-Oh! Of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist. It's the ultimate wizard in terms of attack and defense, Dark Magician. Dark Magician was first released in Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, followed swiftly by its debut to the majority of people in the starter deck Yugi. This would promptly be followed by some 55 or more, didn't quite get the absolute number here, reprints in far more rarities than I would care to list out. And again, unless you want some type of Patreon time theft of a video of me wasting my life reading all the rarities, you're not getting it in this one. But this current brand of time theft I'm pulling isn't just to fluff out the runtime of this video, it's instead time to allow me to display the 11 alternate arts available for this card, with it having the most alternate arts in all of the game. And while I personally would need to seriously fight the compulsion to reach into this drawer and pull out this gun anytime that damn chibi art were to show up, that's besides the point, because the point I'm making here is there's plenty of rarities and arts for you to choose from for whichever it is you're liking. My point being, there's a little something for everyone. IGN score 7.8 out of 10, too much purple. To no shock, the ace monster of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist has never been on the ban list. And if it ever ends up there, you can do to me what I just did to that chibi. Why not? This is a level 7 dark spellcaster with 2500 attack and 2100 defense, and as a normal monster, that puts it in the category of one of the worst ever cards to have in your hand in regards to being able to get it out, and that is foreshadowing in regards to this card's usage in the meta. From jump, this card saw absolutely minimal play. By minimal, I mean damn near none. Because for a long time, the best way to get this card out was through either skill drawing both a copy of this and something like Ancient Rules, getting it into the graveyard and then using a generic revival card such as Monster Reborn, or getting the effect of Skilled Dark Magician off. And regardless of which method anyone here found to be the best in any given circumstance, all of it was consistently worse than what the best decks of the respective formats were doing. Because whatever combo you're pulling off to summon a generic, effectless 2500 beater, other cards and decks can do far more, probably for far less. Of course, you can't really discuss this card without mentioning Summoned Skull, because that's a monster that has the same attack stat but requires one less tribute summon to get it out, which was so notable that Summoned Skull Beatdown was a deck and a thing, and Dark Magician as a deck and a thing simply wasn't. Dark Magician fell very short in the early game, as support for it was significantly more lacking than its rival Blue Eyes. Blue Eyes at least had a deck in the form of Dragon Beat, thanks to the form of Lord of D and Flute of Summoning Dragon, and while that was a bit of a bricky mess, the payoff was at least the strongest attack-statted monster in the game that could beat Summoned Skull in battle without the need for something like an equip spell, which is, you know, another card that you'd have to add in to try and justify playing Dark Magician. It's a tough time. And while you can argue that Blue Eyes also had to contest with something like Dragon Captain Jar to even the playing field, I can assure you Dark Magician left a lot more to be desired, even without specific hyper-targeted anti-meta cards, if you can call Blue Eyes meta in like 2003. You can see this in the absolute lack of play that this card saw in the earliest years of the game, because before 2012 I could find one single deck that topped with Dark Magician, and to its credit, it's a Dark Magician deck. No, not actually at all, but can you imagine? How crazy would that be? This is a very, very standard looking 2004 era deck, just playing the best cards in the most amount, but it's also teched in one Dark Magician and 2 copies of Skilled Dark Magician. But I can assure you, when this deck won, it was far more off the back of BLS and DMOC and all of the best spell cards in the game, far more than the 2 Skilled Magicians and Dark Magician. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd even say Dark Magician did not come up in regards to many of the wins, if any at all, and I wouldn't even be shocked if bricking on Dark Magician was what caused them to not get past top 8, although top 8 is no small feat. We can't be sure, but this is a Chaos deck with 3 wild cards more than it is anything else, and that's the best that Dark Magician was able to snag. Because until 2013, Dark Magician doesn't show up again in any topping deck in any capacity from what I can find. And even then, it's showing up as a joke. If you watch the profile for this deck list, it is explained that Dark Magician is in the side deck because the player got drunk the night before the event, or in one of the nights before the event, and the bet was made that whoever would lose the agreed bet would have to side in a copy of Dark Magician if they ever got to a feature match and try to summon it out. It was put in because of a stupid bet made drunkenly that they chose to honor. Good man that they are. And that's it. It's a drunk dare of a card. And that's not the only time something like that happened. Another player threw it in their side deck in Burning Abyss, and while I can't find anything specific about it, it's pretty clear as to why it happened. It's because it's a joke. For the comedy. The only other topping list I can find prior to 2016 was in one spellbook deck, which again cited it as a joke. Granted, this is the only deck where there's at least some amount of synergy, as a dark level 5 or higher spellcaster, it can be summoned off of the effect of Temperance of Prophecy, and it being a spellcaster makes it a target for Spellbook of Power or any other sort of spellbook card that needs a spellcaster to get off. So that's it. This was obviously not the optimal play to be making and was done for the flex factor and the meme. These 4 decks are the only results I can find before 2016 because it's just not that good of a card in the context of the competitive game. This does change somewhat in 2016, however, because following the actual meta threat that Blue Eyes had become with its support in Shining Darkness, Dark Magician got some support in the following set in the Dark Illusion. But unlike Blue Eyes' support, which seemed catered to make it great in the meta, Dark Magician's support was, let's say, lackluster. Blue Eyes got multiple ways to summon it out from either the deck or the graveyard, and had paired amazingly with a number of generic cards for dragons, such as reborning it from the grave with Return of the Dragon Lords, or a dragon-specific Foolish Burial in Dragon Shrine, plus the draw cards like Trade-In and Cards of Consonance. There was a lot of other synergies that Blue Eyes could take advantage of without just having to rely on their specific Blue Eyes cards. But Dark Magician didn't, and really even today doesn't, have a plethora of generic spellcaster support cards to be able to make use of. And all of its new support kind of just felt like a watered down version of what Blue Eyes got in a way. Like Dark Magical Circle is a card that can search cards, but only from the top 3 cards of your deck. Where Blue Eyes got something like Melody that discarded to search any 2 dragons so long as the stat line was right, Dark Magician got, Illusion Magic, which is a quick play spell, but required you to tribute instead of, say, discarding, and added specifically 2 Dark Magicians to your hand. And then you've got the cards to summon Dark Magician out, something like Magician's Robe, or, Magician of Dark Illusion, that require spell cards to either be activated on the opponent's field or discarded from your own hand, and it has to happen on the opponent's turn, which can be good to help proc the effect of, say, Dark Magical Circle if you've got it up to banish an opponent's card, but it also means you don't really get to get going on your own turn, which certainly compared to Blue Eyes was pretty underwhelming. Meanwhile, the traps require Dark Magician to be in your hand to use, and while that's not too difficult, it's a trap, which means that, again, you're waiting till your opponent's turn to really try and get your board going. And then, of course, there's Eternal Soul, the one that lets you constantly loop out your Dark Magicians, that has the effect that if it leaves the field, it will Regeki your own board. Sick. The trade-off is that it makes Dark Magician a towers of sorts, but it's a 2,500 towers, and that's not that hard to get rid of in battle. And that's just it's a brutal punish for any sort of MST type effect, effective especially when you remember that Cosmic Cyclone, the MST 2.0 or 3.0, I guess if you include Twin Twister, the point is there was a new MST clone that came out in the same set as all the Dark Magician support. And again, you compare this to Blue Eyes' card that can loop out Blue Eyes', the Synchro Azurai Silver Dragon, which is an easily accessible extra deck monster that will summon a Blue Eyes during each of your standby phases, and its other effect isn't Regekiing your own board, it's instead making your dragons immune to Regeki. Just a little bit better. To be clear, the Dark Magician support wasn't bad in the context of it's unplayable. It just made Dark Magician playable, which, you know, relative to what it was prior to that, is a phenomenal accomplishment. But while it made the deck playable, it didn't make it meta. And that's not crucial. There are plenty of people who are fine with it being non-meta, but Lord knows Blue Eyes fans were enjoying a very good time of being able to take their deck to locals and reliably win if they got competent enough at truly playing the game in the deck. There were reasons for Dark Magician fans to be a little bit jelly. And when I tell you that this did not serve as enough to compete, like, I really do mean it. I can find 3 lists, 3 of Dark Magician topping. 2 of them are from regionals, both managing to get top 8 in the respective events, which isn't nothing. That is an accomplishment. That is better than Dark Magician had ever done prior, as like actually Dark Magician and not just 2004 Chaos. But apart from those 2 regional lists, there's only 1 list of note that really is worth talking about, I guess, and that is from the community's own Jeff Jones, one of the best players to play, really. If you want to contest that, go ahead, but I disagree with disagreeing. Taking Dark Magician to YCS Minneapolis in 2016 and getting it its single greatest achievement, the highest ever top that a Dark Magician deck has ever gotten, top 64. In an event without a top 64 because there weren't enough players. As I understand it, he placed 34th on account of the bubble because he had the same results with Dark Magician that 25 other people had gotten in Swiss, so he just missed out. He just missed out on top 32. And after this event, Dark Magician as a deck does not show up again, or at least not that I can find. The problem is it has the same sorts of issues that Blue Eyes has, in that you're remaining 3 copies of a dead draw in most cases, and if you open too many of the vanilla boy, you aren't going to be doing much of anything. And where Blue Eyes at least had something like Trade-In to try and unbrick your hands, Dark Magician didn't really have a whole hell of a lot. If you wanted to play, you know, Sacred Sword of the 7 Stars, you were giving up your Dark Magician, which was the whole point of the deck, is it not? What little you were doing ultimately with Dark Magician was not worth doing much of at all, and competitive players quickly picked up on that fact. Not to mention, shortly following YCS Minneapolis would be the release of Invasion Vengeance, which gave us Totally Awesome and the last of the Paleo cards, and of course something like Dimensional Barrier, and really the meta just continued to shift even further out of Dark Magician's favor. After this, Dark Magician falls once again into irrelevancy in terms of the competitive game, with special note going to this Metal Foe Yang Zing deck that, you won't believe it, cited it in as a joke. Although it did also, it cited Blue Eyes as well, because apparently the pilot just couldn't think of 2 more cards to put in the side deck and went, fuck it, Dark Magician and Blue Eyes. He played the movie art from the Dimensional Dark Sided Dimension pack. How wacky, weeny, teeny wild is that, huh? But this wasn't the end for Dark Magician seeing play, as it would show up in the worst kind of way that Dark Magician fans tend to hate, at least in my experience, and that is as a hard garnet in an engine for the decks that played it to abuse an otherwise generic boss monster that they wish was more dedicated to only their deck. Dark Magician would go on to play one key piece of the puzzle that leads to Red Eye's Dark Dragoon being the backup plan for a wide number of decks. Red Eye's Fusion is a fusion spell that will let you send materials from your deck to the graveyard for the fusion summon of a Red Eye's monster. And Predaplant Verte Anaconda was a generic link too that needed only any 2 effect monsters to summon it out. It could pay 2,000 life points to send a fusion spell from your deck to the grave, and it would copy that fusion spell's effect. And then of course there's the boy Red Eye's Dark Dragoon, a fusion monster needing Dark Magician and either Red Eye's Black Dragon or any dragon effect monster to fusion summon that is untargetable, indestructible, an omni-negate by discarding a card, and after negating something it will gain 1,000 attack, and because that's clearly not enough, it can also destroy a monster on the field and burn the opponent for damage equal to its attack, equal to the number of normal monsters used for its fusion summon. The very long story made short, if you don't want to watch my video on it, Make Verte became the backup plan for any deck willing to risk the garnets to make the trade-off for an incredibly strong and sticky boss monster. Dragoon can win the game by itself with the burn damage it can do and the minimum 3k attack when swinging after clearing the board by itself, plus that pop and destroy doesn't really target because it doesn't target and it burns. It's just fucking, it's kind of an insane card. I'm not going to show you every single deck that would play this because I don't feel the need to show you every single deck from 2020, but believe me when I say it's played in countless decks as simply a solid backup plan if things go wrong, or as a great addition to your end board to make your, chances at winning that much stronger. This was a staple of multiple decks, right up until the release of Destiny Hero Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, which was a new fusion for Verte to summon out since it kind of offered more impact and usefulness in a duel than Dragoon ultimately would, in large part thanks to its just more reliable or disruptive effect, and the fact that, the engine around it wasn't nearly as demanding or cruel as the Red Eyes package was, because let me tell you, drawing Dark Magician sucked, because if you want to use Red Eyes Fusion or Verte, you can't use it has to go from your hand or your deck or the field to the graveyard. You can't, if you get in the graveyard, you can't then use Red Eyes Fusion to summon it out. It's just dead in your hand. And Lord knows, it's not like you're going to summon a level 7 2500 vanilla anyways. It's a bad time. Following the release of DPE, and even realistically the banning of Verte Anaconda, Dark Magician falls again into irrelevance with one single exception. Branded decks would continue to play the plug, giving themselves a nice little garnet because the potential continued access to Dragoon. By throwing Dark Magician in the deck, you could use Branded Fusion to summon out Lubellion the Searing Dragon, which just needs any Dark Monster and Fallen of Albaz as material. Once summoned, you could use Lubellion's effect to discard a card and then shuffle the materials for a fusion monster from your grave, field, or banished pile back into the deck to summon that fusion monster out. And since Albaz is a dragon effect monster and Dark Magician is in fact Dark Magician, the more you know, that meets the materials to summon out Dragoon. And that's what they would do. This was really notable in like Kashtira format because this was an easy out to a Rise Heart that otherwise could really throw a wrench into the branded player decks, but it does still see play outside of the cash format because access to a Omni Negate with a pop and burn is never really a bad thing. There are other means for the deck to use Dark Magician if they happen to unfortunately draw into it, because most branded and Despian and Albaz fusion monsters are pretty damn generic in what their materials need to be. So it's kind of worth it as a one-off garnet to get you access to that oh so powerful Dragoon, and it's not nearly as brutal when drawing it, especially when compared to Dark Magician's previous use as a garnet in the Verte engine. Which, as I make this video, brings us to today. In the context of the meta, Dark Magician is a one-of that you can throw into your branded deck to play Dragoon if you want, and people aren't really going to harp on you too much for it. Unless the branded Discord's really against that. I don't know. I can't see why they would be. I understand why some people do, but otherwise it's really just kind of a flop following its rival's literal world championship success in the same year. Competitively, it makes enough sense. Dark Magician support feels like it's kind of trying to be a control style deck that would have been viable in like 2012 that was printed in 2016. You summon Dark Magician, you banish a card, maybe you made Ebon Illusion Magician, and you can banish another card when Dark Magician attacks. Wow. It's a deck that really favors a slower game pace, but it's in the card game most known for going fast, and that's not the best reputation to have. If I can speak anecdotally, I still have an old Dark Magician deck kicking, and I remember playing it with my friend like a year ago. I was like, I'm just gonna play this. I haven't edited it, tweaked it in like a year. I'm just gonna pick this up and play it. Do you care? He said no. He hadn't played Dark Magician in some time. He's like, so what's that deck's win condition anyways? And I looked him dead in the eye and I said, Solemn Strike. That's the win condition of Dark Magician decks, at least in my experience. But of course, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not just the meta. Dark Magician is a card beloved by plenty for being the ace of Yu-Gi-Oh!'s original protagonist. Or the Pharaoh, is Yugi the... I don't know the lore, dude. I'm not fuck fake fan, who cares? This is the card that set the standard for protagonist ace monsters, with all the following ones keeping that 2500 attack stat, and even following the trend of having a 3000 attack rival, almost always a dragon, if I'm not mistaken. Either way, it's a very iconic card that really did set the tone for Yu-Gi-Oh! In a number of ways. It's continued to receive countless waves of support, even after people have complained about it and after we got like 8 tins about it and whatever. And it's even seeing homages in things like the illusion type's Nightmare Magician, and even really in monsters like Gaga Magician, because that's a wizard with a pointy hood and you're not allowed to at me about this. Regardless of how many waves of support it gets or how good or bad that support is, there's always going to be people hyped for this card. Because to many people, this is the original boss monster, and a showcasing of like the heart of the cards kind of. Because like, yeah, Blue Eyes is stronger in regards to its stats, and its deck might be better from a competitive standpoint, but I think a lot of people like that this card embodies winning with your favorite and overcoming the stronger card with the one you like the most. Something, strong trainers use the Pokemon that matter to them. How is this quote from an Elite Four trainer from 25 years ago still dictating Pokemon discourse? Please God, make it make sense. But in the Yu-Gi-Oh way, 'cause they want Dark Magician players want to use their favorite. That's fine. Overcoming the stronger deck with your favorite, heart of the underdog type moment, that's a large part of Yu-Gi-Oh's identity, or it was in the anime, so I get why people like it. Plus, it's also Yugi's ace monster. Let's be fucking real here. It's not that deep. Main guy's main guy, people like. You know, main guy, people want to buy. Yeah, that's fucking Konami right there for you. And so that's our look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Single card history, Dark Magician. Stay tuned for the next video and feel free to suggest some cards you'd like to see reviewed or what type of video you might like to see. As always, don't forget to like and hit that subscribe button, because once you do, you'll be impressing that smoking Italian wife and you will immediately become a true duelist.